Hello everyone, in this video we are going to discuss the Rousseau Gambit, which is a very interesting and very critical if your opponent doesn't know how to react to it. After watching this video, I'm pretty sure that it doesn't matter which opening you are playing, you're definitely going to try out this particular opening because if you want to score some heavy points, if you want to win some heavy games, this opening can definitely work even against top grandmasters, against super grandmasters, because it is extremely new gambit and very critical. So after watching the video, you're going to simply be expert of it. Now, without any further ado, let's quickly jump into the video. So what is the Rousseau Gambit? First of all, we are playing with the black pieces and our opponent starts the game with a 1 e4. And we with the black pieces replies with e5. Knight f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4. From here onwards, everything is pretty common. But from here onwards, now the Rousseau Gambit is going to begin. After bishop to c4, we are going to play the move f5, which is a very new move in this particular position and a very interesting one. At the first glance, it looks like black doesn't know how to react to this bishop c4. Perhaps black is noob. That is the reason he's playing the move f5. After doing a detailed analysis, I have found out that f5 is a very interesting move and should be played from the black side. So after f5, there are many moves for white to react. White can either take the f5 pawn, he can either push the pawn to d3, he can either play the move knight c3 in order to protect the pawn, or the best move is to play the move d4, which is not at all easy and common. The most natural move is either to take the pawn, to push the pawn, or to develop the knight. But fortunately, everything is wrong. Now let's quickly jump right into every variation one by one. First of all, starting from knight c3. After knight c3, it's losing on the spot because after f e4, knight e4, d4. And I simply hit the bishop and the knight, and I'm going to win a piece and eventually the game. So this particular variation is completely losing for white. So now let's move on to the second variation, which is what happens if white tries to capture the f5 pawn, simply accepting the gambit. After ef5, black plays the move e4. And the idea here is black wants to play the move g5, but after bishop to b5, e4, white is having the ability to jump in with the knight. Because here black cannot capture the knight because the knight is pinned. So what we basically do here is, at the place of first playing the move d5, we first push the pawn to e4, not giving any squares to white because we can simply capture the knight. So we'll have to go back. And after knight g1, we can now play the move knight to f6. Because if we again try to play the move d5, queen h5 is a very strong move from the white side. And we want to avoid that move. So we develop our knight covering the h5 square, and finally we are preparing to play the move d5. And white can't really stop it, so after knight c3, d5, bishop b5, bishop into f5. For example, if d3, this position is already very good for black, but for a sample line, d3, you can simply focus on your development, bishop c5, pawn takes, knight takes, and the position is already very interesting as you can see. So it's a very healthy position. So going back, after ef5, for example, after e4, if white tries to play the move queen e2, which is a very natural move, pinning up the pawn, you cannot capture the knight because the king is attacked. What we do here is, we simply play the move queen e7, and we are again putting the threat of same capturing the knight. So here, white is forced to move the knight, and now we simply develop our knight to f6. Our idea is to play the move d5, so white tries to stop it, we play the move knight e4. Hitting the queen and also the c2 square. So white is forced to go back to d1, and now we play the move d5, a very strong move. It looks like we are sacrificing a pawn, but it's a good idea. If knight into d5, which is a very natural move, we take the knight and we capture the pawn on f5. If you count the material, black is having 6 pawns and white is having 7 pawns, but in the exchange, you can simply long castle. You can already sense such a bad coordination of pieces white is having compared to the black's harmonious development. And black is having a very active play. Definitely white is going to crack anytime soon, and it's completely winning for black. So coming back, if white tries to capture the pawn with the bishop, we play the move queen e5. Hitting the bishop, bishop goes back, and now again capturing the pawn with the same idea of doing long castle and using the benefits of the advantage of development of the pieces. It's a very good position to play with the black pieces. So this is the variation if white goes for capturing the pawn on f5. So now let's move on to what happens if white pushes up the pawn to d3. The idea is to simply protect the pawn on e4. After d3, we play the move bishop to c5. And the idea of bishop c5 here is we are again setting up a trap. For example, if white plays a move like knight g5, the idea is already to play the move knight f7 and hit the rook and the queen. We play the move f4. Simply disconnecting this connection, and now our idea is to simply capture the knight. So obviously white is going to play the move knight f7, and now we play the move queen to h4, jumping in with the queen, hitting the f2 pawn, threatening mate in 1. Short castle, a very natural move, knight to f6. And after knight f6, our idea is already to play rook f8 and try to capture the knight. So obviously white is not having much, but he has to capture the rook. And now comes the move knight g4, threatening mate in 1. White is forced to push the pawn, knight into f2. The queen is attacked, and if you try to move the queen, I can simply capture the pawn, giving a double check, and it's soon going to be a mate. So white is forced to capture the knight, queen takes, king move, and it looks like black's attack is all over. But now comes the final moment, the finale, f3. A very strong move. You cannot capture with the queen because it's mate in 1. So white has to capture with the pawn, or else black is going to capture the g2 pawn and it's mate. So after pawn takes, we play the move d5. The idea of d5 here is, you attack the bishop, if you also attack the pawn on h3. You have to capture the pawn, or else you are going to lose the bishop. White tries to capture the pawn, bishop into h3. And black's idea is already to give a mate in 1, and it's to be true, it's unavoidable, and it's going to be a mate. You can't really protect the mate, and it's mate. That is how, if after bishop c5, if your opponent plays the move knight g5, you simply play the move f4, and the position is completely winning. And to give you one more sample line, after f4, knight f7, queen h4. If white tries to play the move c3, the idea is to simply not allowing black to capture the f2 pawn. You play the move queen h3, and our idea is to play the move queen to g2, hitting the rook and the pawn. So in this particular position, white captures the rook. We play the move d5, a very strong move. Now what's the idea? After d5, our idea is to simply jump in with the rook, jump in with the bishop and attack the queen. For example, obviously, white have to capture the pawn here. We play the move bishop to g4, hitting the queen. If you try to push the pawn, it's completely winning for black, because now I can simply play a very strong move, which is knight to d4. If I try to play the move queen g2, which also looks a very strong move, hitting the rook and giving a checkmate in 1, here bishop into c6 saves the game for white. So we want to avoid it, so we play the move knight d4. If white tries to capture the bishop, we play the move f into g3. And after f into g3, white cannot capture the pawn because the rook is hanging up. So what can white do in this particular position? If white tries to capture the knight in this position, a free knight, we are simply going to push the pawn, hit the rook. The rook move, and now comes the move queen h4 check. The king is having a fourth move, bishop b4 check, again fourth move, queen f2 check, and it's a mate. So this line is again a very interesting one, and many people fall for it. So if in this particular position, if white captures the pawn, again bishop g4, f3, now queen g2 is the right move, because now there is no pawn into, because white is not having that much time. It's mate in 1, white is forced to play rook f1, bishop h3, again trying to capture the rook, again simply capturing the pawn, check, and it's eventually going to be a mate. Like this. Now coming back to this position, And for example, if white doesn't go for this particular variation of with knight to g5, and if he simply does a short castle, which is the most natural move in this particular position, if it doesn't use his brain, after short castle, we are simply going to play the move knight f6. If white captures the pawn, we are happy to play move d5, hit the bishop and capture the pawn, and having a nice center. Capturing the pawn is out of question. Knight to c3, the most common way to play. We capture the pawn, pawn takes, and play the move d6. It looks like black is unable to castle. Bishop g5, but now we are going to play the move knight to a5. Hitting the bishop and making sure that the bishop moves from this particular diagonal so that black is able to castle. So after knight f5, bishop e2 or else bishop b3, we are happy to capture the bishop and do a short castle. So bishop e2, we play the move bishop to e6, and now our idea is to simply short castle. a3, the white's idea is to play b4, so we come back first, knight c6, and finally we do a short castle. And a good thing is, our rook is open now. We can play the move bishop g4, maybe queen e8, queen g6, and black is having a very active play, and it's much easier to play with the black pieces compared to white. Even a e4 pawn can be a target in the future, as it's a bit soft pawn. So this is how you play this particular variation. This variation is also very interesting. So now, after discussing the main variation, after discussing the d3, pawn takes, knight c3 variation, we are finally going to check out the main variation, which is the d4, the main move, which is unable to find if white is not prepared to play this particular variation, or if white haven't studied this particular variation in his past. So after d4, we are simply going to capture the d4 pawn. And here, miraculously speaking, the best move is to play the move e5, which is extremely hard to find. First, we are going to discuss what happens after knight d4. After knight d4, we are simply going to develop our knight. If white captures the pawn, we are going to play the move d5, which is a very strong move. If white captures the pawn, we capture the knight. Pawn takes, we trade off the king. We trade off the queen. And now white is unable to castle, so we do a long castle, give a check, and you can already sense the power of development. Black is very comfortable in this particular position. Coming back, if white captures with the bishop, we capture the bishop, pawn takes, bishop takes, and it's eventually the same position. So yeah, after knight d4, if knight f6, now if at the place of capturing the pawn with the knight, if white does something else like capturing the knight, we capture with the pawn, pawn takes, and we play the move d5. Basically limiting the bishop and not allowing white to take control of the light squares. Bishop goes back. We give a check, trade off the queens, bishop d6, rook e1, short castle. Now we are a pawn down, but eventually, as you can see, f5 pawn is extremely weak. White is extremely passive in this position because his all pieces is still on the first rank. So that's why we are simply going to regain this pawn, and the position is very comfortable for black. So coming back, if after knight c6, b6, we have discussed this variation. Now if white tries to capture the pawn first, we are going to develop our bishop, hitting the knight, making force to trade off the knights. And in this position after d6, again, if you have a queen trade, the position is very equalish. We are going to capture the f5 pawn. For example, after bishop d3, we can already play the move rook e8 check, breaking up the castle, king move, and now a move like a knight e4, preparing to capture the f5 pawn. And the position, like we are also hitting the f2 pawn, the position is also very interesting. And yeah, it's much easier to play with the black pieces. So coming back, now discussing the main move, what happens if white pushes up the pawn? If white pushes the pawn, play the move d5. And pass on, queen takes, short castle. Bishop to e7, rook to e1. Now here I have decided to take two moves into consideration, which is knight to g5, threatening knight f7, and first playing rook e1 and then knight g5. First coming with the direct knight g5 order, After knight g5, white's idea is already to play the move knight f7, hitting the queen and the rook. We develop the knight. Queen h5 check. We play the move queen g6. And the position is already very equalish. It's much easier to play with both the pieces. But yeah. So coming back, if white doesn't go for this queen h5 check and he plays the move rook e1, simply developing the pieces, we play the move knight g4. Threatening mate in 1, like not mate in 1, but this is a very deadly threat. So white must play the move g3, bishop d7. Our idea is to simply long castle. White goes knight f7 in. We go queen c5. A very interesting move and a very silent move. If you try to capture the rook, I capture the bishop. And surprisingly, I want to do a long castle. I'm going to capture the knight. And basically, I'm having 2 minor pieces for a rook, which is winning for black. So capturing the rook is out of question. If bishop b3, we push the pawn to d3. And now again threatening mate. So after bishop e3, we can simply capture the bishop, capture the pawn, and in the end of the variation, the knight on f2 is simply hanging, and we are simply a piece up and winning the game. So this is what happens if white goes directly knight g5. Now, let's go on a bit and now try to discuss what happens if white plays the move rook e1. We play the move bishop d7, knight g5, and here we play the move knight to f6. The idea here is, if knight f7, we play the move queen c5 again, with the same idea. White cannot capture because we capture the bishop, followed by long castle and capture the knight. So bishop b3, rook f8. And now, our idea is already to capture the knight, so knight have to move, and we simply shot long castle. And you can already sense the position, and all pieces are successfully developed compared to the white's pieces, which is still on the first rank. So you can already sense how this position is completely winning for black. So this is how this was the complete Rousseau Gambit, which was very interesting, and you can already sense the moment you play the move f5. I'm pretty sure everyone watching the video doesn't know how to react to this particular opening. Maybe most of the ones are seeing this particular position for the first time in their life. The position is very interesting, and you can definitely play this opening. After watching this video, you are completely prepared to play this opening. So yeah, if you like this video, and if this amazing gambit, the Rousseau Gambit, then make sure to like the video, share this video with everyone, and make sure to subscribe to our channel, because we are going to come up with these more interesting videos like this. So yeah, I'm going to see you soon. Till then, stay tuned and keep watching Oneshot Chess.